Hello and welcome to the India Hangout. We're looking at the road ahead, but as we do that, we're also trying to take stock of what's been happening ever since these historic elections elected Narendra Modi to the post of Prime Minister, which he will be sworn into on the 26th of May, Monday, as we understand now. The question that we are asking today is, are India's liberals unwilling to accept Modi's victory? We are seeing some very interesting anecdotal evidence of this already across, perhaps in our own families, in our own lives, but it's also being played out in a somewhat nasty way in media, and maybe media is one of the bigger victims. So let's understand why this is happening and how and whether this is dangerous for the long term. I am joined by Ayaz Memon, cricketwala, Kumar, Ketkar, editor, journalist, and also James Crabtree of the Financial Times in Bombay. Gentlemen, all thank you very much for joining us. Ayaz, let me begin with you. The big question, are India's liberals unwilling to accept Modi as Prime Minister or his victory to start with?
Well, I think certainly there's been trepidation expressed, even from the time he actually was nominated as the Prime Ministerial candidate for the NDA. So those trepidations perhaps have either gathered more strength or accumulated. But I also feel that one must segregate two aspects of it. One is the liberal segment itself. The other is the media, in which the liberal voice played a significant part earlier.
Right.
Perhaps it may change a little in due course of time. So what we've seen a lot more in the public space or the public domain is the media, the liberal voice being distilled in the by the media itself, which was there.
Got it.
The vast majority of people who are liberals in the country, they may have their concerns, but I think there is still a growing feeling of let's wait and watch rather than just jump to conclusions.
Okay. Kumar.
Well, actually, I think liberal is not one community.
Correct, yes.
There are...
and we are talking a little more about liberal media than...
so we are talking of the liberal media and liberal intellectuals who have taken so far an anti-Modi position, that liberal section.
Yes.
The other liberal section is always open-minded, almost opportunistically open-minded sometimes, and they are always skeptic. They prefer to be skeptic.
Sure.
So they never welcome anything. Not that they are pessimists, but generally they tend to not to welcome anything.
Yeah.
So those...
And they're skeptical of big government,
Yes,
of
yeah,
government's
all
role
that.
in all our lives and so on and so forth.
But the apprehensions about Narendra Modi had not only something to do with 2002, that has been played out too much. What has that to do is with his personality and the style that is known, and that is quite well known. The style of his governance in Gujarat is not inclusive at all, to the extent that he doesn't even take into account his ministers, his cabinet ministers.
Right.
I remember once a cabinet minister of Gujarat told me, you got the appointment of Narendra Modi? I said, we will get if we want. I was not keen, but my colleague was, and he said, oh, you are lucky, we don't get his appointment.
So you're saying that is fueling this whole perception?
Yes, I mean the suspicion about the style, not necessarily about the content or performance. And another was the left liberal wing, just as there is right liberal, there is central liberal and left liberal. Left liberals have been always doubting about the huge corporate and global corporate support that Modi was getting. And that has, according to them, a natural tendency to be anti-poor, to be anti-underprivileged, because corporates are running.
The statement that Gopal Gandhi made, he said that only 31% of people have elected you, and another 69% have not elected you.
Yeah.
Now there is obviously a big question mark about the use of these statistics, but that apart, this almost seems to suggest that, you're not one of us because there's another part of this country which has elected you, and therefore we are not...
that could be said about everybody, including Pandit Nehru.
Yeah, exactly.
Pandit Nehru, the greatest liberal of all, and the founder of liberal school in India, he never got more than 47% vote. In fact, Rajiv Gandhi got in 1984 49.5, whereas Nehru highest was 47%.
Correct. Okay. So let's get a few more thoughts. James, what's the sense that you're getting? I mean, from all the people that you've been meeting since these elections have happened and the results have been out?
Well, I think your point, I've seen also that point about the vote share, which seems slightly spurious to me. It seems that Mr. Modi won comprehensively in the election system that he was given. And if India had a different electoral system like the French one, in which there was a second round runoff for a president, then he would have won that one as well and quite easily won 50% of the national vote in a two-way matchup. So I don't put a lot of stead by that. I mean, your point about liberals is an interesting one, because it seems to me that that actually there are a lot of Indian liberals in the sense that doesn't mean left-wingers, but means people who are socially and economically liberal, who actually not only have accepted Mr. Modi, but embraced him. I mean, somebody like Gucharan Das, for instance, who I think would be a liberal by most people's definition of the word, and his own. Went through a process of public agonizing in his columns, saying initially he wasn't sure about Mr. Modi and eventually that he was very enthusiastic and that he voted for him. And actually, I think a large number of Indian liberals of that stripe, it's not as if that they are resisting Mr. Modi. Actually, the oddity is that they have embraced him just as fully as everybody else. So while there clearly is an element on the left, and that's true internationally as well as domestically, that remains very skeptical and is worried about Mr. Modi's character and his record. Actually, I think a lot of Indian liberals have embraced him surprisingly enthusiastically, and that ought to be what one should be talking about.
Okay, so James feels that it's the problem is that Modi has been embraced too overwhelmingly, or maybe a little too passionately by some people, who we may have expected otherwise.
Well, I mean, purely speaking from a media perspective, I think we are now in that at that stage of our evolution where we seem to be gushing about almost everything, whether it is Modi or about a World Cup victory or about some cinema, movie getting an Oscar nomination,
or 100 crore run on the box office.
But just to borrow from what James said and also what Kumar said, one is that the 31% vote share thing in the context of the Indian elections seems a little spurious, because that's the poll arithmetic for which they had worked. They were looking to get seats. If the issue was a two-horse race, I'm sure then they would have worked their dynamics around it differently, and perhaps the result would have been the same, if not perhaps stronger. So that part also, I think what Kumar mentioned is very significant, that the liberal mindset as opposed to the left of the left liberals is one which should be open and perhaps agnostic, perhaps skeptical, and waiting to see how things unfold rather than taking a very regimented position. So, it depends for all of us now whether you are central liberal or right liberal or left liberal. All these classifications might come in, but I think there is a certain sense of shock and awe at the result, and a realization that it is real. The results have happened. Whatever position you might be in the political spectrum, these are the results given by the majority of the population.
Yeah.
But actually, Ram Manohar Lohia reminded Pandit Nehru that, Mr. Pandit Nehru, you don't represent India, howsoever the world thinks about you, because 53% people are against you, and 53% of the people have voted against you. I think the reason why liberals suspected Narendra Modi's arrival on the scene with such kind of gung-ho is that his record of being inclusive socially, psychologically and politically is obviously not fair so far.
Correct.
Maybe in last 1 year or so he has changed, A, for electoral reasons, B, for political reasons, 3, for power reasons, but the fact is record so far has not been inclusive. So naturally almost the entire
Kumar,
Muslim population.
Is it just that? Because sometimes I get a sense that people just hate him.
No, why? Why anybody should hate anybody?
No,
I think there is always a reason
Yeah.
for somebody hating somebody. Like Mrs. Gandhi was hugely hated and Mrs. Gandhi was hugely loved. So I think all extra affection or extra hatred comes out of a certain perception of the person who has done something or who has not done something.
Okay.
So the perception of Narendra Modi is that he is not inclusive and particularly prejudiced towards minorities, and minorities meaning Muslims here.
Okay.
And also even Christians. And lunatic fringe of his party and the RSS was always conducting itself as if they are the Hindu terrorists.
But they were there when the previous BJP government was there too, right? I mean, they haven't changed.
Yeah, but they did not call the
happened
shots.
then.
They did not get the kind of psychological support. Praveen Togadia and Narendra Modi worked together till almost 2009, when in 2009 he began to sideline him. So people see both of them as opening batsmen of the RSS.
Okay. Okay, James, let me come back to you. Between business and media and maybe the rest of society as you've interacted, are you finding any commonalities in approach on the way Modi has been perceived, particularly in recent months, or not?
Well, I mean, I think the business community is obviously very enthusiastic about him. I mean, what I've found here in Mumbai is that business leaders are actually, to be fair, business leaders are portrayed as being extraordinarily enthusiastic about him. I've not found it to be quite like that. I mean, these people are not stupid. To run companies, you have to be pretty intelligent, and so there tends to be a relatively nuanced understanding where people would like it if he was a little bit more contrite about some elements of his past and had done more to reach out beyond his support base. I think you could see that in the foreign press as well. Most of the foreign newspapers are relatively liberal by inclination, the global ones. But you only really saw the Financial Times sister paper, The Economist, that was really the only one that came out with a fulsome rejection of Mr. Modi. Most of the rest of us sort of pointed out that there were some problems in what otherwise seemed like a pretty positive story and implored him to do something to address them, although he didn't really do that. But I mean, I think in the end, whether they're business or the media, these are institutions that will respect the will of the people, and it seems to me that the will of the people was expressed so overwhelmingly that it's not something that you're going to get people carping about, and particularly within the business community, there's such a degree of anticipation and enthusiasm for what Mr. Modi might be able to do that ends up being by far the most important thing.
Right. Okay, so a few questions, Kumar, let me put them to you, and this is something that I wanted to ask as well. There is vigilance, Hindol asks, there is vigilance required on all governments, but if the so-called Indian liberals are so bitterly abusing the Prime Minister-elect, even before he's been sworn in and after he won an historic mandate, what is their credibility to perform this task of vigilance? Which is the larger question, for those who actually could be using their skills, talents, time,
I think this is an absurd question, and this is completely determined pre-Modi preference.
Okay.
They doubted the same thing about Sonia Gandhi in 1998, 99, 2004, 2009. So the objections raised against Modi by so-called anti-Modi liberals, similarly the objections raised by these people about this stand were the same objections they were raising against Sonia Gandhi for 1998 to 2014.
Okay.
So I mean, it depends on who is on the other side. So it is not as if liberal means you have to be pro-Modi, be soft to Modi, or be soft to Sonia, or be harsh to Sonia. I think that is not the definition of liberal. Liberal has to be skeptical but open-minded, positively open-minded. And if
what's the sense that you're getting? Are you getting a sense? So skepticism, of course. For instance, we had a hangout yesterday, and we were talking to, among other people, Rajiv Karandikar of the Chennai Mathematical Institute. So
Rajiv is a friend of mine.
Yeah. So his point was that the issue now is not about who's elected him and how he's got elected in the composition. It's about will he or the BJP be responsible in Parliament enough to not bulldoze things that they can do because of their sheer majority.
No, I think
that's being skeptical
but I think sometimes you require to bulldoze. And it depends on what you bulldoze.
Sure, fair enough. I'm just saying the skeptical point would be my concern.
No, like for instance, Rajiv Gandhi bulldozed after Shahbano case. That is quite condemned. But that was bulldozing nevertheless.
Okay.
Similarly, Indo-US deal was bulldozed.
Okay.
Now the corporate sector welcomed Indo-US deal.
Okay.
So it depends on which side you are of any particular opinion stream. So Rajiv is absolutely right. But the point is that always these things, like if you don't like it is bulldozed, if you like it is sort of
I think
a lot of questions coming in.
Yeah, I know. This is very interesting. For instance, in the Shahbanu case, as he mentioned, actually that was not a liberal position taken by the Congress government, or even actually what led to finally the Rath Yatra and the Babri Masjid thing, when the Shilanyas were, that was not a liberal position taken by the Congress, and they had to be then come under the vigilance of what one calls the liberal media or the media per se. I think what has happened in this case is that a lot of polarization and apprehensions, polarization because of the apprehensions were already formed or forged before the elections began.
Based on experience.
Based on experience, based on perception.
Experience of what?
Experience of Narendra Modi in Gujarat.
Okay.
And that perception was obviously right. I mean, it's not creation of anybody.
Okay.
The perception was that he is not inclusive. I will just give one small example. He visited the people in hospital in Patna after they were injured in bomb attack. Did he visit
his rally?
Yeah, after the rally. Did he visit even once for 1 hour the refugee camps in Gujarat, where more than 10,000 people were houseless on the first day? Total 50,000 people are houseless, and they are staying in the camps. What is their condition? Many people have reported going there on TV, on camera, that many of these simple life living conditions they don't have. Now, if he is so compassionate, to visit Patna, why did he not visit Gujarat? So maybe he has changed and now he will visit or whatever. I am not saying it's a closed case, but the point is the prejudice was based on the experience and that's why it was extended.
Okay. So, quick points. Anaga says Modi seems to have taken a moderate path. So, what is making the liberals so skeptical?
No, now not obviously. I mean, they will not. If he takes a moderate path, why should we be skeptical?
Yeah. Okay, Adil Hussain, when religions take center stage in our democracy, it is very dangerous. There's someone else who says yes, because the man should not have been allowed to run for higher office, which is okay. Sesha says, I think when the UPA government was in power, we saw loads of scams and problems. So why not give Modi a chance to change our country?
Yeah, that's okay.
I think that's a redundant question now.
Yeah.
That's a redundant question, yes. That's a pre-election question.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Kumar, is there a bias or continuing bias? Maybe not so much in Mumbai where we are sitting, maybe in Delhi, as they say in South Delhi or South Bombay for that matter, that because of Modi, people are not comfortable with Modi's humble origins?
No. I don't think that. Because all of them had humble origin. Lal Bahadur Shastri had humble origin, Devegowda had humble origin. Dr. Manmohan Singh himself, as he said, I am a refugee from Pakistan, coming from a very poor family. He became Prime Minister for 2 terms. So I don't think that really bothers the people. What bothers the people was whether you are compassionate, whether you are inclusive, whether you are not in that politically whipped term secular in that sense. But your secularism automatically means that you are responding warmly towards the people. So far, there is no evidence of his warmth. Today's speech obviously is quite emotional, and therefore many liberals today, I think will be changing after his speech today.
Okay. So let's ask the next question. If as we sort of move forward, is this a BJP problem or a Modi problem?
This is a Modi problem.
Okay.
Because BJP's problem, if it was, then in 98-99 it should have been seen. Vajpayee never even once went to Rath Yatra, not even for 1 hour. He never endorsed Rath Yatra. He always kept inclusive approach. He publicly said that India must follow the Nehruvian policies of social justice and foreign policy. So he was a quasi Nehruvian. So nobody suspected Vajpayee. In fact, they recommended him thrice. He became 3 times Prime Minister, 96, 98, 99. And nobody suspected his origins or whatever, nothing. So it is not a BJP problem. But the RSS problem is there.
Okay.
And the suspicion about RSS is among large Hindus. It's not only Muslims. RSS is suspected of its devious tactics.
I think at the core is the idea of India. I mean, without getting into too much rhetoric, I think it's the idea of India, and therefore, what kind of a fit does Mr. Narendra Modi have? I think his speech today was very interesting, because it was all about this is for the poor, this country belongs to the poor, without the poor, or uplifting them, you know, which seems like almost like a hark back to Indira Gandhi's slogan, Garibi Hatao, or the Nehruvian model, so to speak. It's not, the corporates will benefit, everybody will benefit, let's build 200 cities and bullet trains. That was not what he said today.
Yeah.
So I think
it's there in the manifesto.
It's there in the manifesto. It's there in the manifesto. I think somewhere,
but manifesto is of the party, speech is his.
I think somewhere Mr. Modi himself realizes that he's been a very polarizing person, or a personality, and therefore now that he's assumed the highest office, it's one thing being a chief minister for state, very successful perhaps, and also being prime minister now of the country, are very vastly different things.
James, how
he shapes up is going to be
right. So James, how do you see the two personas and the two roles? The chief minister of a state, provincial role versus the head of state for a country. Again, from your perspective.
Well, I think it's a moot question at the moment. The liberal hope has been that, as happened to Mr. Vajpayee, that when you move up to become Prime Minister, you become in a sense constrained by your responsibilities. You want to be re-elected, and therefore you have to govern in the interest of the whole nation, and that something sort of magical happens to you when you walk into the Prime Minister's office, and some of your worse, more nativist, regional sort of partisan instincts are tempered. That certainly seemed to be the case with Mr. Vajpayee. I think it's a moot point as to whether the size of Mr. Modi's majority now makes that more likely or less likely. I think you could argue both sides of that case, that that he may now see himself as being a leader who has reached to parts of the country that the BJP hasn't managed to get before, and that he has a personal mandate to govern in the interests of the whole nation. On the other hand, it would be fair to say that most of the seats that he's got have come in the Hindi-speaking heartland of North India and the sweep of states like Gujarat and those close to it. And so it's not clear to me that this happens automatically, and therefore I think it is reasonable for liberal-minded people to be worried about whether or not this correcting mechanism will work in Mr. Modi's case.
James, if you were to cast your eye across other democracies, as you often do, are you seeing increased polarization? I mean, I guess I'm implicitly suggesting there is increased polarization. I mean, whether in the United States or maybe other democracies as well. And has this polarization, in some ways, we may divide it in the liberal or non-liberal context or some other context. Has this come to set in? Has it become, in some ways, part of our lives now?
I mean, it's interesting that you say that. I have read a lot of people say that this election campaign was peculiarly negative for India, and the country was very polarized. Actually, looked at as an outsider, it didn't seem to me to be very negative at all. I mean, if you look at the rubric of American campaigning, where you have vicious 30-second attack adverts every day and a news cycle in which people are attempting to kill each other on television, actually, while there were some personal attacks and personal barbs, most of the adverts that were run by the candidates, I thought, were broadly positive, and there didn't seem to be too much vicious infighting. On the point about where India sits within other democracies, I'm not sure if I'd see a link with what's happening in the West. What I do see is a pronounced trend within emerging Asia for leaders who are what you might call liberal authoritarians. I mean, I think you can see this with Nawaz Sharif. You see it definitely with Rajapaksa in Sri Lanka. I mean, I think actually Rajapaksa and Modi have a lot in common, and the liberal worry would be that in the end Mr. Modi starts governing like Mr. Rajapaksa, who is very good at building roads and ports and airports and has made the capital of Sri Lanka very pretty, but has gradually undermined all of the liberal institutions in the country and has done nothing at all for the people who are not from his vote base. And so I suppose I see that around Asia much more in a much more pronounced way, and I suppose the hope would be that Mr. Modi does not follow the path taken by Mr. Rajapaksa, right, no matter how good he has been in increasing the country's growth rate.
Right, and that's a point made by quite a few people here too. Kumar, let me come back to you, and Ayaz, two more questions here. Anwar Khan says, as a Muslim, I don't know whether I should feel, what I should feel about Modi, happy or sad. As of now, I am scared.
Absolutely right. That's what the point I was making. Because among Muslim localities, there is fear not based on prejudice, based on how he conducted himself in Gujarat. Okay. So 2002 memories for Hindus are different. 2002 memories for Muslims are different. Okay. And the kind of messages, kind of communication, that underground communication network that every community and caste and every society has, in that communication network, who is vulnerable? Vulnerable is obviously not a Hindu. Right. So Hindu liberal can afford to take a stand that you are misunderstanding Modi and Modi should be supported. That Hindu liberal can take a stand safely. He is not vulnerable. Right. But a Muslim will be obviously vulnerable.
So a question in some ways it follows up from that. As you wanted to say something, but I'll come back to you. Will Modi's religious bias overshadow his development agenda? Asks Rashi.
Well, I personally don't think. I think he will overcome.
Development will still be
I think my point here is that there is a distinct possibility that Modi marginalizing RSS. And in fact, in the RSS ranks and in the senior BJP ranks, there is already apprehension that Modi may not take us seriously. Okay. And Modi does not want anybody, no remote control on him. So RSS remote control, if it becomes a Hindu remote control, he wants to sideline them. Okay. But I don't know whether he will be able to sideline the corporate remote control. I don't know that.
Okay. No, I think this there is obviously, because he is from the RSS background and very strongly so. Yeah. And therefore, the RSS mindset is the kind of biggest worry.
In his DNA now.
Is the bigger worry for the liberal set. For instance, in the previous regime of the NDA, you had history books being tampered with, and
that is bound to happen.
So that is the worry.
No, that is bound to happen. History books will be tampered. Okay. That I am absolutely certain, irrespective of the tears for the poor. Okay. That is bound to happen, because that is the agenda.
That a charge that can be leveled with?
No, it is simple. Narendra Modi will be Prime Minister. He will, deploy all the development perspective, corporate sector, public sector, whatever.
Okay.
But who will manage the education department?
Okay.
The textbook departments, history departments, all the ICC, SSR and so on, all these institutions finally will be in the hands of the RSS.
Okay.
And they will convert the agenda, so-called development agenda or progress agenda or humanist agenda into a communalized agenda. That I am absolutely
They will
sure.
try, you're saying. They will try.
So,
They will convert. I am not saying they will try. They will try and succeed.
Okay. But that's a serious charge.
Of course,
Kumar
I am
Ketkar.
making a serious charge. Education department, they tried with the limited NDA government in 1998 and 99 to change that. So, how will they not do with their full majority? I mean, Narendra Modi may be well-meaning. But if you tell Narendra Modi, look what they are writing in history, he says, well, so far there was a Congress written history, now let it be changed. So he may have
that
a
a bad thing
perfect
then?
development plan, 100 cities and big roads.
Okay, so what, I mean, so it could also be argued that the Congress written history was also not perhaps the best version of history.
Yeah, okay, that can be said. But
Okay.
at least there were liberal schools.
Okay.
Like nobody accuses Romila Thapar of Congress history.
Okay.
Romila Thapar cannot be accused of Congress history. Bipan Chandra cannot be accused of writing Congress history.
Okay, so let me get some more quick questions here. Okay, comment first from Shaima. Bottom line is it's a clear victory. No coalition, single largest party. That's democracy. I guess it's in everyone's interest to give him a chance. Watch what he does, and if there's a violation of democracy, speak up. So that's one question. The next one is, what will make the Liberals accept Modi?
If he is
the swearing in.
no, swearing in won't. I think what will make the difference is what kind of people he is surrounded with. What is his, what you can call kitchen cabinet. Now he will not have a kitchen cabinet, but he will have some kind of a coterie. Now that coterie's perspective will not be necessarily same as Modi's perspective. Modi can take a grandstand position, but that doesn't mean that his coterie will take that, and certainly not the bureaucracy. And the bureaucracy in India, tries to, always appease the man at the top. So that in that appeasement process is where liberalism will face danger.
Okay. Yes.
I think, Govind, the answer lies in how well or how soon he can change the strong regimented perception people have about him. For instance, Atal Bihari Vajpayee was also from the RSS, spent a lifetime there, but he had a persona which was more like a poet and a bit of a philosopher and a bon vivant. He loved life, and Mr. Modi
including
comes across,
whiskey.
Mr. Modi comes across as a single-minded, focused,
Yeah,
determined to
get the
do
work
exactly
done.
what he had
Get the work
thought
done.
of. And
More
so
question, Kumar,
he
this is
needs to
for you
change that.
specifically. Which strong CM does not assume powers in their states? How is Modi different from Jayalalitha, Mamta, Lalu?
Of course, absolutely right question.
Okay.
Jayalalitha and Mamata are absolutely no different than Narendra Modi in their respective states.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you think the minorities, people who voted against Modi, would feel threatened considering the 2002 riots? I think you've answered that question. This is, though it was from a different person. Hindol again asked, are we letting our biases get the better of us? Can past performance be indicative of future returns?
No, never. I agree. Past performance can never be indicator of
In
future,
politics.
but past performance will always remain. It doesn't get washed away.
Okay.
It will remain a reference point. It need not necessarily say everything about future. And everybody quotes nowadays how Walia became Valmiki and wrote Ramayana. So,
right. Okay, James, last couple of points. Let me come back to you. Media, I mean the role of media in all of this. There's a question here as well on our G+. Is it, did it lean too much one way or the other, and is there a feeling that now media will try and correct itself and therefore in the whole thing appear a little biased?
I mean, I didn't detect too much bias during the campaign. You've heard a lot of people make claims about the tendency to have had bits of paid news during the election, but I didn't particularly find that the media was biased against one candidate or the other systematically. I mean, it seemed to me that the narrative of the election was set so early, which was that the Congress was completely hopeless and Mr. Modi was going to win by some degree or not, that it was almost impossible to deviate from that big story because it was so obvious what was going to happen. I mean, just briefly to touch on this issue of Mr. Modi's past record, I mean, I think the questioner who said he should be given a chance, I think makes a very fair point. He doesn't appear to have campaigned using what you would call the dog whistle politics that has sometimes been associated with his party. However, the point about his record is meaningful. I spent Friday in Gujarat and spent some of election day in Juapura, the effective Muslim ghetto in the south of the city. and was just very struck by what I found there. I'm sure maybe our other panelists have been there as well, but this was a place that was described to me as not being like a ghetto in the American sense, where there were only a lot of poor people, but a ghetto in the sense of a 19th century Jewish ghetto in a European city where all Muslims in the city, be they poor or middle income or rich, are forced to live. And that had historical roots, but is really a legacy of Mr. Modi's time in government. And I think it is fair to look at things like that and ponder whether the choices that he has made leaving the capital city of his state so divided along religious lines were the right ones, and to hope that similar policies are not pursued now that he is Prime Minister.
Right, and which brings us to the last question, or the final, the same question that we started with. Are the Liberals unwilling to accept the Modi
I don't
victory?
think Liberals will be permanently unwilling to accept.
Okay.
I think there will be Liberals who are genuinely can be Liberals without going into the trap of being left Liberal or right Liberal. If they are liberal, open-minded, genuinely skeptical but positive looking things, I think they will change.
And that's what we need.
And that's what we need, and that's what is likely to happen. Okay. In fact, the critical liberal area, that is the left liberal area, will now start abusing these liberals who will change.
Also from a media point of view, Govind, from a media point of view, let's go back to the classical position, which is that one should be objective. Unless you're a mouthpiece, you have to be objective and look at it. You may have your personal leanings, journalists are like everybody else, but they need not obfuscate everything because of some personal beliefs. They have to look at things objectively, and I think that I'm sure that there's no blue sky scenario for Mr. Modi, and it's a completely clean slate. There are some clouds here and there, but it need not be a completely grey blanket.
Right.
Cloud.
Yeah. So, on that note, and we have run out of time, and we must end there on the note that we've got lots of work to do. So, and for all sides, the people who have been elected resoundingly, and for those who want to be skeptical and
wait and watch
and monitor this new government and this new era, as it were. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us on the India Hangout. See you soon.